A whole century of nonstop, brutal war. You'd think that could only lead to destruction, right? But what if? What if it could actually create something new? Today, we're diving into how the Hundred Years' War didn't just tear Europe apart, it actually forged two of its greatest nations, England and France, right out of the fire of battle, plague, and rebellion. It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? How can so much destruction be a creative force? Well, the answer is that the constant, relentless pressure of war forced these old medieval kingdoms into a simple choice: innovate or die. They had to come up with new ways to govern, new ways to fund massive armies, and in doing all that, they accidentally developed a whole new sense of who they were as a people.
So our story actually starts not in France, but right on the island of Great Britain. Back in the late 13th century, an English king had this one huge ambition: to unite the entire island under his personal rule. And that ambition? It was going to be the first hammer blow in forging a stronger, more unified English state.
So meet the man at the center of all this, King Edward I. Before him, English kings pretty much just ruled England, but to the west you had the fiercely independent princedoms of Wales, and up north, the separate proud kingdom of Scotland. Edward was absolutely determined to bring both of them under his control, and he was more than willing to use force to do it. Now, what's so interesting is how his campaigns turned out completely differently. He successfully crushed Wales, killed their leader, and then named his own son the Prince of Wales, a title that, believe it or not, is still used today. But Scotland, oh, Scotland was a whole other story. The Scots fought back with everything they had. They rallied behind their national hero, Robert the Bruce, and won an incredible, stunning victory at the Battle of Bannockburn. The result? A conquered Wales and a fiercely independent Scotland, setting up centuries of different national identities on just one island. You see, while Edward was off fighting all these wars, something really profound, almost a quiet revolution, was happening back home in England. A totally new kind of government was starting to take shape, one that would eventually become a model for the entire world. Parliament didn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It evolved. First, you had the Great Council, where the king would just consult his top nobles and bishops. But then a whole new group got invited to the party, the Commons, who represented knights and rich townspeople. King Edward I made this a regular thing in his model parliament of 1295, and pretty soon after, the whole group split into the two houses we still recognize today, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. So you might be asking, where did Parliament get all its power? Well, it all came down to one simple thing: money. Kings needed tons of cash for their constant, super expensive wars, and Parliament quickly realized they had some serious leverage. They came up with this core principle. Look, before we approve any new taxes for you, Mr. King, you have to listen to our complaints and promise to fix them. This redress of grievances became the bedrock, the absolute foundation of Parliament's growing power. Okay, so now all these different pieces we've been talking about, you've got English ambition, the king's desperate need for cash, and this rising power of Parliament, they're all about to crash together. They are setting the stage for a massive crisis that's going to plunge England and France into one of the longest, most devastating wars in European history. And here's the spark that lit the fuse. The old line of French kings died out completely. So England's king, Edward III, whose mom just happened to be a French princess, saw his chance and made this incredibly bold claim to the French throne. The French, as you can imagine, were having none of that and chose their own king. That single dispute is what kicked off the whole thing, the Hundred Years' War. Man, this war was a real roller coaster. Early on, the English longbowmen were just unstoppable, wiping out the French knights at famous battles like Crécy. But the war just dragged on and on for decades, and then it was interrupted by the absolute horror of the Black Death. Much later, it looked like England was about to win it all, but the tide was about to turn in the most unbelievable way imaginable. And then, out of nowhere, this incredible hero emerges. A teenage peasant girl, Joan of Arc, who said she was guided by God. She somehow managed to inspire the totally demoralized French army, leading them to a mind-blowing victory at Orleans that completely changed the course of the war. Even though she was eventually captured by the English and tragically burned at the stake as a witch, her story gave France a new sense of courage and a powerful, unifying symbol of national identity. As if 100 years of war wasn't bad enough, European society was also being ripped apart from the inside. This was just an era of total catastrophe, with disease and social rebellion shaking the very foundations of the medieval world. 50%. Just
let that number sink in for a second. Half. Half of England's entire population gone. Wiped out by the Black Death in just 1 year. It's almost impossible for us to even imagine that kind of devastation. Society was just fundamentally broken. But here's the crazy thing. The plague, for all its horror, had this shocking and totally transformative effect on society. With half the workforce just gone, the laborers who survived were suddenly in huge demand. They started demanding better wages. Serfs, who were legally tied to the land, started to resent their old duties. All this tension just boiled over into the massive peasant revolt of 1381. And even though the revolt itself was crushed, it sped up the end of serfdom in England. The old feudal world was dying fast.
So when the war finally ended in 1453, a century of fighting and plague and revolt had taken a massive toll. The two nations were totally exhausted. They both turned inward to recover. And as they did, their political systems started to go in two completely different directions. Over in England, losing in France was this huge national humiliation. The powerful noble families, who had lost all their lands and their whole purpose across the Channel, they just turned their armies on each other. They began fighting for control of the English crown in a brutal, bloody civil war we now call the Wars of the Roses.
Meanwhile, in France, victory had the total opposite effect. The king came out of the war more powerful than ever. He actually convinced the Estates General, which was kind of France's version of Parliament, to give him a permanent tax, called the tile, to fund a professional full-time army. All of a sudden, the king didn't have to go begging his nobles for troops or his people for money anymore. He just had both.
So let's just break this down side by side. You can really see the two different paths they took. England's chaos finally ended with a powerful new king, Henry Tudor, but Parliament survived, and it held on to that crucial power of the purse. In France, the king's power was cemented, while the Estates General just faded away into irrelevance. One nation was on the road to a constitutional monarchy, and the other, well, it was on the path to an absolute king. In the end, there's no doubt about it, the fire of the 100 Years' War did forge two modern nations. But that leaves us with this one final, really important question. In building these strong central governments that were capable of waging total war, had both England and France simply traded their old feudal bonds for a new, even more powerful kind of royal control? Sure, nations were born, but you have to wonder, what was the price for the freedom of their people?